Hello everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about different senses, hearing, balance, taste, smell. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started. So the receptors convert signals from the environment. This is also known as stimuli into nerve impulses. This conversion is called sensory transduction. External receptors are sensory receptors that detect stimuli from the outside of the body. And some examples of this is taste, smell, vision, hearing, and equilibrium. And they consistently send messages to the central nervous system. Interoreceptors receive stimuli from the inside of the body. And some examples of these are baroreceptors or pressure receptors, which respond to changes in the blood pressure. Osmoreceptors monitor water and salt balance. Chemoreceptors monitor the pH of the blood. These are directly involved in homeostasis. So if you guys remember, homeostasis is maintaining an internal environment and are regulated by negative feedback equilibrium. Sensory receptors are classified into four categories: chemoreceptors, photoreceptors, mechanoreceptors, and thermoreceptors. Chemoreceptors respond to chemical substances. This is, for example, taste, smell, and the blood pH. Nociceptors are pain receptors. This is a type of a chemoreceptor. And basically, these are extremely important because this is the ones that uh, protect us and give us an alert of danger, such as, for example, whenever you put your hand on something that is hot, or if you step on, like, say, for example, on a nail, something like that, right? So nororeceptors are activated, and you quickly move your hand away from, the heat source, or move your feet from whatever is stabbing you. Photoreceptors respond to light, whereas mechanical receptors are stimulated by mechanical forces. Some examples of these are hearing, balance, touch, blood pressure, stress receptors, or proprioceptors. Thermoreceptors stimulate by changes in temperature, and they tend to regulate the body temperature. Some examples of these are the hypothalamus and the skin. Sensation, the conscious perception of stimuli. This happens in the cerebral cortex, and the sensation depends on which part of the brain receives the nerve signal. So before the sensor it initiates the nerve signal, they also carry what is called integration, which means that they actually integrate the signal. One type of integration is known as sensory adaptation, and that is basically it's a decrease in response to a stimuli over time. An example of this will be like smelling odor at the first, and later not noticing that the odor is still there. And sensory receptors send fewer impulses to the brain, so that's essentially what's happening here. Right, initially, right, you send signals to the brain, you're aware of the smell, but then as you've been exposed over time, then you send the signals, and eventually you don't even notice the smell anymore. Somatic senses are associated with the skin, muscle, joints, and viscera. Receptors are categorized into three types. You have proprioceptors, cutaneous receptors, and pain receptors. They all send nerve impulses via the spinal cord to the primary somatosensory areas of the cerebral cortex. Proprioceptors are mechanoreceptors that are involved in the reflex action that maintain muscle tone, equilibrium, and posture. An example of the proprioceptors are called muscle spindles, and they're embedded in muscle fibers. So basically what happens here is that if a muscle relaxes too much, it stretches and sends nerve impulses that contract to the muscle. And this is an example of Golgi tendon organs in the tendons. So when the muscles are stretched too much, they generate nerve impulses that cause the muscle to relax. Cutaneous receptors make the skin sensitive to touch, pressure, pain, temperature such as warm and cold. And types of cutaneous receptors are sensitive to fine touch. And these are, for example, the Meissner's corpuscles or crossed ankles in the fingertips, palms, limbs, and tongues. Merkel's disc, so this is where the epidermis meets the dermis. Root hair plexus, these are free nerve endings wrap around hair follicles. Respond if the hair is touched. Tissues are damaged by toxins or mechanical, thermal, or electrical stimuli. They release chemicals called prostaglandins, which binds to another receptors. And so the way aspirin and ibuprofen works, they reduce pain by inhibiting the enzymes that synthesize prostaglandin. So essentially what happens here is that you're releasing less of prostaglandin. Taste and smell are called chemical senses because the receptors are sensitive to the molecules in the food and air. Chemoreceptors are plasma membrane receptors that bind to particular molecules. Chemoreceptors are divided into two types: those that respond to distant stimuli, such as, for example, factory cells, and those that respond to direct stimuli, such as, for example, T cells and pH receptors. The taste buds are primarily located on the papillae. They're also present on the hard palate, the pharynx, and the epiglottis. Humans have five main types of taste receptors. So we have a sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. They actually have an opening of the taste port, and the taste buds have supporting cells and taste cells with microvilli. So when the molecules binds to receptors proteins on the microvilli, nerve signals are sent to the gustatory taste cortex, and this is located in the parietal lobe, where they are actually interpreted as particular taste. About 80 to 90% of what we perceive as taste is actually due to the sense of smell. This is why whenever you're sick, whenever you have a stuffy nose, you cannot taste olfactory cells found in the olfactory epithelium in the roof of the nasal cavity are basically modified neurons. Each has an olfactory cilia which bear receptor proteins for odor molecules. Olfactory cell has only about 1,000 different types of receptor protein. Nerve fibers from similar olfactory cells to lead to the same neuron in the olfactory bulb. An odor contains many different molecules, and in that case, it actually activates a different combinations of receptor proteins.